So the point of that story is if you're not spending the majority of your time in the beginning of every project identifying what motivates your audience, you're doing it wrong. And if I could make this slide huge in big shouty letters, I would do that. This is so important. I'm going to say it again. If you're not spending the majority of your time in the beginning of every project, treatment plan, employee incentive program, you know, if you're a company looking to market to a certain group, if you're not spending the majority of your time figuring out that audience, what motivates them in that context, you're doing it wrong. You could design the most beautiful game, incentive program, multifaceted, intricate, clever, you know, whatever you want to call it, and if you bring it in front of your audience and it's not something that motivates them, you're wasting your time. You're going to have to start over because you're not going to get the behavior that you want. So let's talk about the science a little bit. Dopamine, one of my favorite molecules. It's actually on my necklace right in the center. So what people used to think was that dopamine was this, you know, the pleasure chemical, the pleasure neurotransmitter. And it's involved in a lot of different things. You know, pleasure, motivation, sexual desire, movement. It's involved in a lot of things all throughout the body. But people primarily thought it was associated with pleasure. So over the years, though, what scientists noticed was that there were really odd times when they would find spikes in dopamine. For example, in times of high stress, they would notice a spike in dopamine. Well, that's a negative event. Why is there dopamine if it's supposed to be a pleasure chemical? Or people with PTSD, they would hear gunfire, and then there would suddenly be like a spike in dopamine. So when they started thinking, well, maybe it's not all about pleasure, you know. So they started, this one researcher, John Solomon, what he did was he was studying animals in different states of dopamine levels. So he took some of the animals and depleted their levels of dopamine artificially, and the other ones he left them the same. So they found this food that these animals really liked. They found something that they really liked, and they created two conditions. One was low, low, one was high. So they had a small pile of food, so it was like low reward, and then they had a big pile of food, which is high reward. So the low reward situation was right in front of them, and the high reward was behind this little fence that they had to jump over. And so they found that the animals that were depleted of dopamine, they would eat the low reward food, but they would always just skip the high reward. They would go without food because they're like, oh my God, I don't want to climb that wall. Forget it, it's not worth it. They would just forego the thing that they found pleasurable just because they were not motivated to do so. So what they determined then is that the primary function of dopamine is not just pleasure, but it's motivation. So often they overlap, but they are not the same thing. So in the brain, pleasure and motivation are actually two separate things. So this is really important when you think about designing a program. So you're trying to get a group of people to change their behavior. So what's the first thing you do? What do they like? And then you try to throw things that they like at them, and you expect them to change their behavior. Well, it doesn't actually work that way. So let's map this out a little bit. So you have pleasure and you have motivation on two sides, two different things.